This is All About Bitcoin, a show dedicated to all things questions and markets relate to Bitcoin. Little b for the currency and Bitcoin, big B for the network. A collective journey to understand, apply, and use this innovation. All Bitcoin, all the time. Let's take a look at Bitcoin right now. On the XBX, Bitcoin price index is at $56,835. Bitcoin is slightly down about 1.5% over the past 24 hours. The most reliable reference prices for institutions since 2014 are now published under the CoinDesk brand, trusted globally as the leader in crypto news, events, and data. So looking at some of our top stories moving markets. Well, El Salvador ambassador to the United States, Milena Mayorga, addressing an IMF report saying Bitcoin should not be legal tender in El Salvador. When asked if Bitcoin was a way to circumvent the influence of the IMF, which El Salvador has an over $1 billion loan agreement with, the ambassador had this to say. Have a listen.
We have two different legal tenders, and we have to see two different ways of founding our government, our country. And that's why the Bitcoin bonds, and this is a different strategy. And I understand that they're afraid and they're concerned, because if we succeed, as I said, a lot of countries are looking at us and they will follow, our leadership.
The ambassador also said that Bitcoin challenges the authority of the United States. And taking a look at other news, stablecoin Tether crashing on Indian exchanges amid news that India is seeking to ban all private cryptocurrencies as part of its legislative push to create a central bank digital currency, or digital rupee. Some folks taking advantage of the arbitrage opportunity, buying up USDT for as much as 60 rupees when it should be worth about 74 rupees. Tether maintained its 1-for-1 peg with the dollar on Western exchanges. Finally, after weeks of contentious testimony, a federal jury begins deliberations on the estate of Dave Kleiman versus Craig Wright. 10 jurors must decide whether Craig Wright, who claims to have invented Bitcoin, was in a business partnership with the late Dave Kleiman, and if so, what Kleiman's share of the entity's assets is worth. Joining us now to discuss the news is Thomas Hook, Chief Compliance Officer at Bitstamp USA. Hello there, Thomas. Thanks for joining us. So starting off with India, Bitstamp currently supports instant credit and debit card purchases of cryptocurrencies in India, according to Bitstamp's website. Now, I know you're part of Bitstamp's USA branch, but I'm wondering if you might be familiar with your compliance knowledge, what India's crypto ban, what happens now?
Thank you for having me, by the way. I think we wait and see. I think we have to see what, actually comes down on regulation, and everyone's going to have to react accordingly. We're no strangers to this type of news in this industry, so we have to be nimble and adjust.
Do you foresee a scenario where governments ban crypto and start seizing private crypto?
It's hard to predict the future here, but I think that most governments are starting to see the utility and the mainstream swell of cryptocurrency. So I doubt that you're going to see too many countries ban it. I think instead they're going to have to put in place common sense regulation to allow folks to continue to feel comfortable with it and continue to invest and be a part of the industry.
Right. Well, we're told that crypto wallets are very secure. We're told that, your keys, your crypto. I wonder, though, can governments seize crypto that is privately held in wallets?
So it's a really good question. I think just as they can seize assets in traditional banking institutions, that can happen in the crypto space. I think you see it in the news that law enforcement agencies in the U.S. or in other jurisdictions are seizing crypto assets, and that can happen in a variety of ways.
And maybe you could go through some of them.
Sure. So I think there's really two different trains of thought here, or two different lines. Obviously, there are two different ways folks can keep their assets. You can have a self-custody private wallet, or you can use a secure exchange custody provider where you keep your digital assets. Along the lines of a self-custody private wallet, the only way to access that is with your private key. Without the private key, you can't access it. So what would happen in those instances is if law enforcement identified that those digital assets were used within a crime or proceeds of a crime. They could apply for a seizure warrant and essentially compel the owner of that wallet to provide the personal key to access those funds and transfer them to a wallet that is in the control of the authorities. On the exchange side or the custody provider side, it's really no different than traditional banking institutions. Law enforcement would again have a seizure warrant. They would issue that warrant instead of on the individual who would have access to that, only have private access to their wallet. They would issue it to the institution, to the exchange or the custody provider, and request that institution would have to abide by that seizure warrant and transfer those assets to the authorities to, again, a wallet under their control.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about in the case of Craig Wright? Worst case scenario for him is that he loses the case and ends up owing the Kleinman estate lots of dollars and doesn't have the money. But Wright also told CoinDesk that nothing is in his name if he does have the money. And so if he is sitting on billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, how could authorities seize the money if the person is not cooperating?
So it becomes a tricky circumstance. If it's held in a private non-custodial wallet and they can't gain access to that private key, then they kind of are out of luck. Think of it like if you're someone who doesn't trust banks and you put your money under your mattress or you bury it in your backyard somewhere. If the authorities want your funds, they've got to get the location out of your brain, right? What they would likely do is, hold them in contempt, bring other charges to try and get the individual to provide the information that they're required to do so, and go from there. But it does have its difficulties.
Mm-hmm. Well, in his case as well, I mean, he has written several keys and wallets that rather he's written and submitted various wallets that he allegedly owns. Is there any way to get access to them if he is not cooperative? And some of the wallets that he says he owns has been proven to belong to, for instance, the Mt. Gox hacker. So it's unclear that he is telling the truth on whether or not he owns all the wallets that he says he does.
Right. I mean, that's certainly, if law enforcement's looking to seize assets from somebody, they have done forensic analysis on their end, using forensics tools to kind of trace a variety of information to identify, where assets go and where they're held, but also they can use information, fact patterns, transaction patterns, media information, things they know about an individual, IP, geolocation, lots of different things to identify and kind of triangulate who the owner of a wallet is. So they'd be able to confirm his ownership to some extent or not. But ultimately, they would have to prove to if the federal law enforcement wanted to seize those assets, they would have to prove to a court of law that those assets, they have a right to seize them and that those assets do belong to this individual and then serve them. So there would be some due process that would have to come up.
It's looking like it'll be a long case. All right, Thomas, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your insights. Have a great Thanksgiving. That was Bitstamp USA Chief Compliance Officer Thomas Hook. Coming up, Bitcoin price analysis with CoinDesk's very own Director of Data and Indexes, Galen Moore.
The chart of the day is brought to you by Crypto.com, the world's fastest growing crypto app.
Bitcoin meeting $57,000 resistance during U.S. trading hours today, while alternative cryptocurrencies, including Ether and other layer 1 tokens, recover to above their 7-day lows. As a result, the Bitcoin dominance chart seen here shows the extent of BTC's dominance over the rest of the crypto market. Yet it continues to signal a bias toward altcoin exposure, according to TradingView, down to roughly 42% from October's high at about 47%. Blockchain analytics firm Into the Block noting a stronger correlation between the stock market and Ether than between stocks and Bitcoin, saying, quote, Bitcoin is struggling to consolidate as an inflation hedge, but it is also not following risk assets, which may be leaving some investors uncertain. Ether has been more closely correlated to stocks, which suggests investors are treating it more like a risk on trade. CoinDesk's Muyao Shen and Dominic Dantes saying Bitcoin appears to be oversold, which could support a brief rise toward the $60,000 resistance zone. BTC has held short-term support at about $56,000 as selling pressure stabilizes. Further, Bitcoin's correction from an all-time high of nearly $69,000 appears to be exhausted, which could encourage buyers to return. Now, joining us to discuss is CoinDesk Director of Data and Indexes, Galen Moore in Boston. Oh, hello there, Galen. Always a pleasure. So, taking a look at Bitcoin, what do you make of the price trajectory?
You know, the narrative of the past few weeks, Christine, I think we discussed this last week, seems to be Bitcoin moving in opposition to the dollar index, right? That's the dollar against a basket of comparable fiat currencies. So as the dollar strengthens against other fiats, Bitcoin is feeling some downward pressure. That's certainly a narrative that makes sense, especially given the news we've been reading out of El Salvador this week. You know, whether that will continue to be the case, I think is anybody's guess. It was only a few weeks ago that we were talking about Bitcoin kind of moving up with stocks. So I'm not, I'm not sort of like very confident about that narrative for the long term, but that certainly seems to be the situation we're in today.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you see India as being a sort of headwind to Bitcoin, along with China, Asia in general, amid news that they are going to be submitting a bill to push their own central bank digital currency and ban private cryptocurrencies in the process. We see that effect having a crash on Indian exchanges as well as Tether.
Definitely some uncertainty and bad news out of India, where you sort of thought you might have some regulatory clarity emerging there. The introduction of this the potential legislation is a step in the other direction. I'm not sure how much of an effect you could say the India market has on Bitcoin or any of the sort of blue chip cryptocurrencies. Certainly, we've seen press releases out of Beijing move the price of Bitcoin. But I'm not sure the same could be said for Delhi rather. The one thing I think is interesting is the price of Tether. And you saw Tether kind of lose its peg, at least in the short term, in a local market, arbitrage, presumably kind of bringing it back to where it should be, and probably a temporary condition caused by a kind of a rush to get out there. But certainly a kind of an interesting thing for Tether watchers to watch and see how that sort of money market function can be disrupted, at least in a localized way.
Well, isn't that very concerning? This is a stablecoin that's supposed to be pegged one for the dollar, and you see it crashing below that.
But you're seeing it crashing at the on-ramp, off-ramp, which is the point where you're trying to convert those. Where you're on an exchange, you have a USDT to the local currency pair, and you're trying to bring it off exchange. I don't think you'd be likely to see an effect like that on any of the USDT to USD markets that are out there, but certainly on that market. And given the local conditions in India, with everybody fearing that they might not be able to get, they might sort of find the asset that they're holding on exchange, right? USDT being the dominant quote currency globally. Many people holding balances on exchange in that currency. If you're fearful that that's suddenly going to be kind of anathema per the government, then you might be looking for a very quick way to get it off the exchange. And that's, I think, what caused the price crash there. So I don't think it's globally concerning for Tether, but certainly a kind of a dynamic that we may see play out again in other markets.
Right. Well, let's move on to some Bitcoin bulls. And we had a chance to speak to the El Salvador ambassador to the United States this morning, who is explaining that the Bitcoin could challenge the U.S. and that they are using two sources of legal tender, Bitcoin and the U.S. dollar there. They're going to be building a Bitcoin city based on $1 billion worth of bonds. Half will go toward building that city, half will go toward buying more Bitcoin. And investors in these Bitcoin bonds are expected to get as much as 146% APY, according to Blockstream. And this is based on modeling that Bitcoin goes to $1 million in 5 years.
If Bitcoin goes to 1 million, you won't see me here anymore, Christine. And I don't think that that's unlikely, at least not on the time frame that they're talking about. I think they're really just talking about what this what a Bitcoin denominated bond looks like, and it's a very interesting experiment. When you consider a country like El Salvador, similar countries have they do not have a great track record with the IMF and the Washington Consensus. I think there's certainly arguments worth making that the Washington-based global, sovereign lending situation has not served countries like El Salvador very well. So looking for an alternative here certainly makes sense. It is a shot across the bow of the IMF. And I think, combined with what they're doing with volcano mining, you have a source of energy that is far from the grid. It kind of hand in hand in a way. A great analogy from America's own history would be the development of grain alcohol production in the Smoky Mountains, far from railroads, no interstates, and needing a way to turn a production into cash. And so, if you have energy sources that are far from the grid, far from use, Bitcoin provides a way to turn those into cash. So I think seeing El Salvador pursue both of those paths, seeing the quality of talent and individuals who are focusing on that, working on that, companies like Blockstream participating, it's all very good signals. Building a Bitcoin city, it reminds me of Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, the high-tech city that was going to be built there, or maybe still is. I'm a little skeptical. But at the same time, with a Bitcoin-backed, with a Bitcoin-denominated bond, it gives you some assurance, takes away some of the risk that might be involved in a bond denominated in the local currency.
I'm curious, why won't I see you if Bitcoin hits $1 million? It's because are you retiring, or it's just because you just don't?
Yeah, I don't know. I might just spend my time. I mean, first of all, on a Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I might be, cooking right
now. Okay. All right. Well, happy Thanksgiving, Galen. I hope you have a good time with family and friends.
Thank you. Same to you.
Will you be making some turkey? All right.
Yes.
I'll be making some turkey.
We'll be doing that.
Stuffing.
You? Very good. Very good. I'm mostly focused on the gravy, personally.
I'm very enthusiastic about that. All right. That was CoinDesk Director of Data and Indexes, Galen Moore. Gravy is necessary. That's it for All About Bitcoin. I'm your host, Christine Leal. We'll do it all over again on Monday. CoinDesk is off for Thursday and Friday for the holidays. You're watching CoinDesk TV. Have a great holiday weekend.